Canada has declared January 29th a national day to combat Islamophobia. The event is promoted by the National Council of Canadian Muslims, originally CARE Canada, the Canadian arm of a US-based lobby group with a history of foreign funding. It is also authorized by the Canadian Council of Imams to collect zakat. This is a pillar of Islam sometimes described as almsgiving in the cause of Allah. This is a doctrinal category that includes jihad. Its parent organization in the United States was an unindicted co-conspirator in the Holy Land Foundation terror financing trial, and it has since been designated by Texas as a terrorist-linked entity. Yet in Canada, it is granted political access, media promotion, educational, and institutional authority. Its former director of communications is now Canada's special representative on combating Islamophobia. In her official capacity as Canada's special representative on combating Islamophobia, Ms. El-Gawabi lobbied federal departments to establish Muslim prayer rooms in federal buildings and described failure to do so as an instance of workplace Islamophobia. In notes disclosed under Access to Information, El-Gawabi's office characterized the absence of accommodation for Muslim prayer during business hours as Islamophobia in the workplace. She pressed government managers to install Muslim prayer rooms within federal offices, even lodging complaints when the response from the Canada Revenue Agency was not sufficiently prompt, according to those records. Now, every January 29th, this alliance is celebrated. Monuments are lit green in honor of Mohammed, his favorite color. Schools hold lectures, and government departments signal their solidarity. Much more than a memorial for victims, it is a political event created to advance the institutional protection of a system of law that silences criticism and punishes dissent. That system is called Sharia. Canada has effectively criminalized Islamophobia without defining it, placing 40 million people under the threat of investigation or even voicing concern about an ideology that already demands global submission. The Islamophobia-motivated incident reporting tool, this is an app, is actively promoted to help track and report hate-motivated incidents. And on March 15th, the International Day to Combat Islamophobia from the UN, the genuflecting to political pressure from Islam will begin again. But what is really being protected? Now, Sharia is the ordained path of Islam. The two are inseparable. Yet every year, Canadians are asked to mark this date with green squares and public silence about its teachings and their inevitable consequences. Politicians and labor unions quickly line up to show support. Buildings, bridges, towers, and clocks glow green. Classrooms receive instruction kits. Panels and lectures are held, insisting that Muslims are victims deserving of special recognition and that Islam itself must be shielded from criticism. This is a campaign to embed into Western law and culture the belief that Islam may not be questioned, examined, or opposed, no different from an Islamic state. January 29th now serves as a shield for supremacist doctrine that demands political and legal immunity. Islam divides the world between those who submit to its rule and those who do not. The Quran, Hadith, and legal rulings of Sharia establish this division without ambiguity. Quran 9:33 says, "It is he who has sent his messenger with guidance and the religion of truth to prevail over all religions." And in Quran 8:39, to fight them until there is no more fitna and the religion is all for Allah. Islamic jurisprudence rules that showing contempt for Allah's name or denying a verse of the Quran is apostasy, and that apostates should be killed. Quote, "Whoever changes his Islamic religion, then kill him." Bukhari 69:22. This is the ideology now being protected under the name of Islamophobia. And the Canadian state is not just tolerating it, it is embracing it. In fact, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney recently stated that Muslim values are Canadian values, thereby conflating doctrine with people, but a statement in direct conflict with the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, nevertheless. So how did all this proselytizing for Islam in Western universities and other institutions begin? Well, in November of 1979, armed men stormed the Grand Mosque, seized the Kaaba, and declared that the Mahdi had arrived in Mecca. This was a sign of the end times. They denounced television, westernization, and the Saudi monarchy's corruption. They demanded that Islam must return to its roots, and as with Iran in 2026, there was a media blackout. Police and military refused to take up arms inside the precinct for fear of eternal damnation. The Saudi royal family, facing mass rebellion and unable to quell the uprising, turned to the ulama. These are the Islamic scholars. One of the conditions for issuing a fatwa to retake the mosque was to expand Islam abroad. Preaching Islam inside the kingdom was no longer enough. It had to be global. Other Islamic countries, such as Qatar, have followed suit. That bargain changed the world. Dawa, proselytizing for Sharia, has become a strategic export. Billions were poured into Western institutions, charities, universities, and mosques. Waqf-backed funding networks were activated. The objective was doctrinal from the outset: the expansion of Sharia, the ordained way of Islam. Every government, university, and NGO that now marks Islamophobia Day is taking part in that post-1979 campaign. What began as a violent demand for the return of foundational Islam, as required by the doctrine itself, has, over 4 decades, transformed into policy, funding, and legislation across the non-Muslim world. What were formerly the most tolerant countries in the world are now taking their marching orders from the least tolerant, passing that on to youth, many of whom are now teachers and in government. The advance of Sharia into Western societies has occurred through naivety, greed, and the infiltration of institutions that present themselves as neutral, benevolent, and humanitarian. Canadian universities play a central role, yet face no requirement to disclose foreign funding. In January of 2026, the University of Regina announced it was welcoming 24 male Afghan students through the Qatar Scholarship for Afghans project. Qatar is not a neutral actor. It is a state governed by Islamic law, a supporter and financier of jihadists, and a long-standing promoter of Sharia-based education abroad. The program is presented as humanitarian assistance. In practice, it embeds Islamic ideological networks into Canadian academic life under the protection of international partnership language. Mohammed said, quote, "And I command you with 5 that Allah commanded me: listening and obey, jihad, hijra, that means migration, and the Jama." This is from Tirmidhi 2863. A similar pattern is visible in the United Kingdom. Former military barracks in East Sussex and Scotland are being repurposed to house hundreds of adult male asylum seekers. These relocations occur quietly with no consultation, no transparency, and no scrutiny of the ideological commitments of those being settled. The public is asked to assume compatibility. The doctrine they are commanded to follow is never examined. A new contact of mine, originally from India, described what he observed during several years living in Britain. He spoke of a population trained to feel moral guilt for defending its own laws, culture, and freedoms, while extending limitless accommodation to a belief system that openly rejects them. Objections are reclassified as bigotry. Silence becomes a civic virtue. This inversion has nothing to do with race. It has everything to do with ideology. Sharia defines non-Muslims as subordinate. It regulates public life, education, speech, gender relations, and belief itself. When institutions refuse to acknowledge this, they do not preserve harmony, they accelerate conflict. We see what happens when Islam gains state control in Iran, Afghanistan, Syria, and many others. Islam is a theocracy. It is a system of governance built on religious supremacy and legal domination. Once Sharia is entrenched in state institution, it is no longer an individual belief. It is imposed on all who live under it, Muslim or not. Iran is one example. Following the 1979 Islamic Revolution, Iran institutionalized Islamic law as the basis of the state. The supreme leader is not merely a religious cleric. He is the final legal and political authority. The president, parliament, judiciary, and military are all subordinate to religious rule. The result is theocratic enforcement of Sharia on a national scale. Now, for the people, that means compulsory hijab for all women from age 9, lunar years this is, so that could be 8, enforced by state law, age 7 in school. And this is from the Quran, 24:31 and 33:59. There's gender segregation in schools, public transport, hospitals, and government institutions. Apostasy is punishable by death. Blasphemy and insult to Islam is criminalized and weaponized against political or professional enemies, often leading to execution or long prison sentences. Censorship of all media, including books, films, music, and journalism, is based on Islamic criteria. Morality police are empowered to arrest and punish citizens for non-compliance with religious dress and behavior codes. Religious vetting of all candidates for political office by the Guardian Council. Islamic courts may impose doctrinally prescribed punishments such as lashes, stoning, or amputations, in addition to the thousands of public executions and hangings. State surveillance of private life, with citizens reporting on one another for un-Islamic conduct. Internet, speech, academics are all heavily monitored. The Ministry of Culture and Islamic Guidance requires that all songs, lyrics, performances, and concerts must be officially approved. Women must not sing solo, be in small groups, and have a female audience. Dancing in public is illegal. In 2022, a young couple in Tehran received long prison sentences after dancing publicly and posting it online. Severe restrictions on non-Muslim communities as well, especially Baha'i, Christians, and Jews, including employment bans, school expulsion, and destruction of religious sites. Iran is a multi-ethnic country. Its population includes Persians, Kurds, Azeris, Arabs, Baluchis, Turkmen, Lurs, Gilaks, Mazandarans. I always have trouble with that word. Armenians, Assyrians, Jews, Christians, and Zoroastrians. Sharia is imposed on all of them. There is no opt-out clause. There's no sanctuary for conscience. While young women and men in Iran are tortured, raped, executed for removing their headscarves, singing, dancing, or protesting for basic freedom, the West turns away. And yet, instead, on January 29th, Canadians are told to praise Islam. They are instructed to light candles and green squares for an ideology that, once given power, punishes everything Canada claims to value: individual liberty, freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, and equality before the law. Sharia is not culture, it is governance. It replaces secular law with divine command, and it does not limit itself to Iran. It is the stated goal of Islam to bring all legal systems into conformity with its own, and the West is not outside that ambition. Reading the Sirah, which is the life of Muhammad, the Hadith, which are the stories and traditions about him, and the Quran, it is quickly evident that jihad is violent, but it can take many forms. Jihad of the pen, the word, and the dollar, and more recently the ballot box, are also deployed. It is doctrinally sanctioned and carried out in the cause of Allah, as outlined in Quran 960, 9:111, and reliant to the Traveler Classic Manual of Islamic Law. The past 2 decades alone have seen thousands killed in jihadist attacks. New York, 911, London, 7/7, Madrid, 2004, Paris, Charlie Hebdo, Brussels, 2016, Manchester, the Ariana Grande concert, the Supernova Festival in Israel in 2023, Moscow in 2024, Kashmir and Bondi Beach in 2025, as well as Toulouse, Nice, Vienna, Nairobi, Mumbai, Mozambique, Nigeria, and countless others. Europol continues to warn of the persistent threat of jihad. And in 2025, Christmas markets in Germany were heavily fortified or canceled altogether for fear of attack. But what about the United Nations? How has this been allowed to happen? Since 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights has served as the moral emblem of the United Nations, and yet the Islamic bloc never adopted it, and the UN has never enforced it. Instead, the UN has built its legitimacy on a document that its largest and most powerful voting bloc rejects. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation, made up of 57 Muslim majority states, is the wealthiest and most influential voting bloc at the UN. It is this bloc that now sets the terms of human rights on the global stage. In 1990, the OIC formalized its rejection of the Universal Declaration by adopting the Cairo Declaration on Human Rights in Islam. Article 24 left no doubt, quote, all rights and freedoms stipulated in this declaration are subject to the Islamic Sharia, unquote. In 2020, the term Sharia was replaced with references to Islamic principles, the Charter of Medina, and Muhammad's last sermon. In other words, Sharia by another name. This wasn't reform, it was camouflage. And it's remarkably easy to pull off when non-Islamic states remain doctrinally illiterate on the subject or rely on advisors and national security experts who themselves adhere to these same principles. Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights guarantees freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. Under Islamic, none of these exist. Under Islamic law, none of these exist. Apostasy is punishable by death. Criticism is criminalized. Non-Muslims are second class. And dissent is treason. Yet the UN now endorses global initiatives rooted in the Cairo framework, including the promotion of Islamophobia as a legal category. Canadian officials speak of multiculturalism while aligning policy with an international religious bloc that rejects the very foundation of universal human rights and the Canadian Charter. Sharia advances because cowardice rewards it and willful blindness enables it. It is not because Western politicians believe in its principles. It is because they fear being called names. It is because they prefer career advancement to confrontation. It is because their ignorance is protected by advisors who benefit from keeping them in the dark. This cowardice has been institutionalized. It now operates as a machine of plausible deniability. They refuse to name the doctrine. Islamic law, jihad, apostasy, supremacy are all avoided. The word Sharia is scrubbed from policy. They denounce its critics. Citizens who expose doctrinal facts are labeled Islamophobic, surveyed, censored, sometimes prosecuted, despite often being those most committed to defending universal human rights. They hand the microphone to its promoters. Islamic activists are elevated as representatives, while the dissenting voices of ex-Muslims or victims of Sharia are cast out as traitors or ignored altogether. Every year, this pattern is reenacted. Public officials perform their virtue. They stand at the podium, light candles, quote out of context verses about peace, and tell the public that Islam is about love and the threat is hate. Behind them, Islamic legal demands grow. Prayer rooms in workplaces, halal-only school cafeterias, segregated events, censorship of curriculums such as music and swimming, intimidation of women, and public funding for groups that support blasphemy laws. Rather than defend the public, authorities have chosen to deny, suppress, and submit. The real danger is the Islamization of formerly free and open democratic societies. The threat is ideological, not personal. It is the calculated alignment with a system that punishes dissent, silences truth, and claims dominion over every aspect of life. And the trajectory is clear. Governments that protect Islamic doctrine from criticism will, in time, be expected to submit to it. The 2017 mosque shooting in Québec City was a horrific crime that rightly drew national grief. But the tragedy has since been repurposed. It has become both a vehicle and a shield for promoting Sharia. The lives lost are no longer remembered as individuals. Instead, the January 29th event has been transformed into a national spectacle, an orchestrated display in which every Canadian is expected to take part as if culpability were collective. It is a ceremony of surrender. We are meant to recite the script, lower our eyes, and grant the power of legitimacy to those who exploit tragedy to advance Islamic governance. There are more victims of Islam than of any other totalitarian system in recorded history. Over 280 million, according to historical estimates, of conquest, slavery, and jihad. Mohammed, the man Muslims are told to emulate, whose sunnah, or example, is sacrosanct, was an intolerant preacher turned jihadist who had every idol but one in the Kaaba smashed, hardly multicultural. And yet Western municipalities are lighting their skies up with green to honor him. Sharia is the threat. The ideology is the threat. And any public figure who blesses this day while ignoring the doctrine it protects is abdicating their responsibility to the country that they serve.